The International Civic Society Center is actually a fabulous center to train and communicate amongst civil society internationally. And you've been with the International Civil Society Center for quite a number of years. So I would think that the economic dimension is quite important. We've already heard that finances need to be given to whatever project you're doing, whether you are empowering women, whether you actually sort of give access to diverse courses, to thinking, changing thinking also needs money in order to instigate it. So I would like you, Helena, to take it away and to introduce your panel. We've got an hour and 10 minutes, and then we'll go into the final round. So could you please give her a slight applause? Yes.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes. Okay, great. We will try to entertain you after lunch, and we'll see how far we can go with that. Before we start with our panel of 3, I would like to introduce Gaëlle Desmoulins. Where is she? Who will start our panel with a short presentation on a project she just implemented in the Ivory Coast. Gaëlle is a French-born woman, but she spent all of her professional life in Africa, first with UNIFEM in Morocco, after that with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Cameroon, and now based in Senegal for the last 2 years, if I'm correct. 6 months. Okay. And she will give us a brief insight into a specific project she did with women's collectives in the Ivory Coast, to give us some spark to then try to cover this big economic dimension and break it down a little bit into more specific ideas and things that we should push for in the post-2015 agenda. Thank you, Gaëlle.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I would like to present one of the programs of the Fund for Gender Equality. So just to explain, I'm the program specialist for the Africa region. So I cover the monitoring aspects of 19 programs in Africa, and I'm going to present one of these programs today. So what is the... Okay. What is the Fund for Gender Equality? The Fund for Gender Equality is a grant-making mechanism established in 2009 to advance the universal mandate of UN Women by helping to close the gaps in the implementation of gender equality commitments, specifically those which advance women's economic and political empowerment. So we work on 2 aspects, economic and political empowerment. Our mission is to support women's civil society organization, but also the government, to implement programs that transform the structural causes of gender inequality at the level of laws and policies, and also at the level of social norms and practices, so at both levels, and while addressing the needs of the most marginalized and excluded women and girls. I think we have not discussed this before, that we work really with marginalized and excluded population. So to explain, the fund is now the largest grant-making mechanism. There were 2 cycles. The first cycle was released in 2009. So basically we are a grant-making mechanism, and we release a call for proposal, and then the NGOs proposed a program, and based on an assessment from independent evaluators and women's rights specialists, we grant a number of NGOs and government. So we have, in 2009, 40 grants, and in 2011 and 12, 56 grants. So it's a total of 96 programs in 72 countries, and it's also the opportunity to thank the German government who has contributed in this mechanism. So our impact, where we work, where are the grants? Here you can see the map. In red is the economic empowerment programs, and in blue it's the political empowerment program. You see in Africa that it's mostly on economic, but some of them are on political empowerment as well. And the gray one are on both. Okay, now I would like to present the one program which is based in Côte d'Ivoire. It's implemented by ONEF, which is Organisation Nationale pour la Femme et la Famille, so it's National Organization for Women and the Family in Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast. The title of the program is Economic Empowerment of 100 Rural Women Collectives in 3 localities, so they work in 3 regions, and with a budget of $420,000 for 2 years. So the program is coming to an end at the end of this year. The goal, as you can see, is to improve rural women's lives by increasing access to land, education, technology, credit, and other productive resources, and participation in the decision-making process. The overall goal, of course, is to achieve gender equality. So how do they do that? This is, I think, the core of the presentation, what we try to understand and how we can learn from this experience for the post-2015 agenda. So first of all, ONEF has implemented some sensitization activities, targeting the village authorities, also men. We've discussed a lot this. We've involved men, women, youth. And so the sensitization activities were on women's rights. And for instance, they have broadcasted some radio program on female genital mutilation, on the issue of women's spoliation of land, for instance, or on forced and early marriage. They have also printed out some booklets on women's rights. So for instance, the CEDAW, but in a version that is very easy to understandable for local authorities. And this booklet is now used by the local court. So for instance, you know, in Côte d'Ivoire, when you have an issue in your family, for instance, about land or any issues, you don't go to the Abidjan in the capital to rule for your case. You go to the village local court, and we have the testimony of one person. For instance, Mrs. Timeko Anik. Actually, her husband died, and the family wanted her to get married with the brother of the husband. This is quite common in several countries in West and Central Africa. But she didn't want to get married with her deceased husband's brother. So the family had the house back and all the land back. And so she didn't agree with this decision. So she went to the local court. And actually the local judges used the booklet that ONEF has printed on the CEDAW and saw that this was not according to the international laws or even the national laws. And so they ruled in favor of the woman. And she had her land back and her house back as well. So this is the kind of mini revolution that is happening in these villages, or transformative change in a more political correct way. And the second area of intervention is the setting up of 100 rural women's collective in 3 localities. At the beginning, they were targeting 3,000 women, but now they have 5,000 women because of the program has such a success, and the chiefs of the villages really wanted more women to be involved in this program. So they give the women some literacy courses, business skills also. They improve their capacity in business skills, and they provided them with some equipment. And so now the women are able to grow and sell manioc, rice, and corn. And what do they do basically with this money and with these products? First, they keep some of the products for themselves, so they can have food on their plates. Then with the funds, it goes back to a bank account, and they use this money for in case of emergency, like if there's health issues in the community, or if one person dies, then they have some kind of fund or solidarity fund. And finally, they also have some of the money for their own pocket, and most women use these funds for school fees. So basically, the consequences of this small entrepreneurship program is providing women with food, and also it's kind of a health insurance for them, and also it's improved the education in these villages. Now on the advocacy and strategic partnership side, the program is coming to an end. So they wanted to make sure that these collectives will continue after the program is ending, because it's always an issue when the grants are ending. So they did some strategic partnership with the local authorities, and they're also creating a platform between the producers, so the women's collective, and the traders, and also the carriers, to ensure that the products will be sold after the program has ended. Okay, and I just wanted to share the testimony of one person. Her name is Mart Dion Oli. Just so that you can see the kind of change that it has on a woman's life. So she says, "I lost my father. My brothers have inherited of all the land from my father. None of the daughters had inherited the land. My husband didn't allow me to participate in decision making. Despite the fact that I was working in the field to sell his products, I saw nothing from it. He spent all the money without even asking me if I needed anything. I could not stand this life, and I considered divorce. After the sensitization to women's rights on heritage and access to source and means of production, my brother gave me 3.5 hectares of forest. Today, thanks to this program, I own a field of cocoa tree, corn, manioc, and rice, and I am in the Rural Women's Collective. My husband has changed. He has realized that without me, he cannot have sufficient income. With awareness training on women's rights from ONF staff, sometimes my husband asks my opinion on various topics affecting our home, and he respects me more." So this is just one testimony. There are many of them, but it's just to show you the kind of impact it can have on one woman's life. So just to conclude, and to see the lessons learned that we can have from this program, first of all, you see that the Fund for Gender Equality really wants to empower the civil society organization, working at local level, also at national level, working on policies, etc. But we really have a focus on local level. We also work on multi-dimension. You see that we are not working only on entrepreneurship, but also on women's rights and building the capacity and the knowledge so that women are able to claim their rights. And also, we discussed this earlier, but we associate men in all the program. This is very important. And also traditional leaders, and work on what we call exit strategies, so strategies for when the program ends. So these are the basic lessons learned from this program, and I think it can lead to interesting discussion for the panel. Thank you.
Okay, if I may ask the two other panelists to join us in front. First, we have Caroline Ramati Mugala from the East African Trade Union, Unions Confederation, joining us, and then Gudrun Lachenmann, Professor Emeritus at the University of Bielefeld. So may I invite you to join me up here, and thank you for the presentation, Gail, who I think raised a lot of the points that we discussed earlier today, but also that I would like to discuss now within the next hour. And I would really like to start with Caroline and start with a more or less personal story. We now heard a testimony from a rural woman from Gael, and you are the first woman to be appointed as Executive Secretary of the East African Trade Unions Confederation, and I would like to ask you to share how you got there, what were the challenges on the way to get to that kind of position, and what kind of lessons do you draw for other women to be to increase women participation in those leadership positions in the economic sphere?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm used to talking when I'm standing. I'm not used to talk when I'm sitting. I'm very excited to be here, and I would like to thank you and women for inviting me to come here. As you've heard from the moderator, my name's Caroline Kamati Mugala. I'm originally Kenyan, but I stay in Tanzania. I have some relations in Uganda and Zambia, so I'm a child of Africa. I work for the East Africa Trade Union Confederation. It's an equivalent of the European Trade Union Confederation that it has affiliates in the 5 East African community countries. So I head 6 national centers with associate affiliates from Somali and South Sudan. And as many of you know, the trade union movement is a male-dominant kind of sector or career, and it has been a lot of challenges in terms of my career through the trade union. I got there by accident because I have a background. My degree is in biochemistry, so everybody keeps on asking me, what are you doing with the trade union? But these are just some of the challenges of a young woman trying to join the labor force in Africa, and in terms of how sometimes the kind of courses we do are not related to what the labor market wants. And that also brings out the challenge of most of our African countries, if not all, not carrying out manpower surveys to know exactly what does the labor market need. I did biochemistry because I was good in sciences, but I didn't have the stomach of doing medicine, so I settled for biochemistry. But if someone had taken me through career, guidance and counseling, and what I really wanted to do, I would have done economics. So I always tell people, in my next world, when I'm born again, I'll definitely be an economist. Yes. So after looking for a job for 1 year after I finished my university, it's a little bit frustrating because you've gone through college, and I went through a private university in Kenya, which is really, really expensive for a common person. And my mother, there was an agreement between my parents. My mother is the one who paid my school fees. I'm the 10th born in a family of 11, so there was kind of separation. So my school fees was my mom's work. She paid my school fees throughout university, and my dad took care of the school fees for my other siblings and brothers and sisters. So there was kind of a separation in terms of what do I do? How does the mother contribute to this? So I'm what I am because of my mother, because she was also economically empowered. But she was not a rich woman because she was only a farmer. And we spend a lot of time in the garden, plowing and supplying maize and beans to local secondary schools and high schools. And whatever she got there, that's what she used to supplement my father's income. So for me, when you talk about economic empowerment of a woman, I really know what that means, because I have been there and I've gone through the system and I know it. So after tamarking, that's what we call back home, tamarking for 1 year, and not being able to get an employment, frustrated that I need to start helping people back home, and then accidentally got through the trade union. And I got a job as an accounts assistant. collecting union dues, looking what people have paid union dues, who have not paid every month. And then after working with that, I would see people. I was in the upstairs office. Normally, we would always say if you're on the top office, then you're in a better place. But then I realized the downstairs office, there were these women who were always, moving out, gender mainstreaming, we are going for gender training, we are going for a gender campaign, we are going for a women campaign, we are going for, gender-based violence, GBV. At that time, I didn't know what it meant. Then I said, no, I think I'm in the wrong place. I really want to go downstairs. I don't want to stay upstairs. So that's how I got into real trade union work. Then I had to go back to school, learn, understand what gender is. I did a course in gender mainstreaming. I did a course in social security. I did a course in anything that I could do to get the knowledge that I needed to keep me. And then finally, I was given a project on social dialogue in Kenya. I ran it for 2 years. Then I was seconded in the office in Arusha, which is the regional office. And then unfortunately, or is it fortunately, my boss got another job somewhere. And then the place was vacant. And I was the most senior one in terms of experience in the office. And I was given to act. I acted for 7 months. Probably people were still trying to decide if they should give me the job or not. But one of the things that I really noticed, and one of my brothers, trade unions, we call everybody brothers and sisters. So one of my brothers who was talking about the role that men play in terms of the progress of women. For me, I am where I am because of the men in my life, starting from my father, and also the mentors that I have gotten in the trade union movement to be where I am right now. So for me, the session that just finished was quite inspiring and quite eye-opening, because if men are not involved, then this fight for gender mainstreaming is going nowhere. Because I was supported by the men, both in my life and in the trade union movement. So now I sit on the board with all men, and I'm there, and I can tell you, taking women issues on board can be really challenging, because I remember when I arrived at the office the first time, my former boss said, oh, she's here. She can take care of the women things. And I'm like, why do you think I'm the one who should take care of the women desk? Is it because I'm a woman? But he said, because nobody knows what to do with those things. So, and I said, okay, this is actually an opportunity to bring women agenda into the organization. And we started by reviewing the constitution, because that's the most gender insensitive constitution I had ever seen in my life. So we had to go through that review, bring the gender aspect in the organization. And that even goes on to say more about women being involved in the policy-making processes, from the basic policies of like an organization structure. If it is not gender sensitive, whatever other policies that you bring on board will not be supported, because the organization constitution itself has no place for gender. So we need to go back to the basics in terms of women empowerment and women improvement. And that's what I did. Even in terms of doing the reports, when you report, we need to know how many participants attended, how many of them were men, how many of them were women, just little things. And at the end of the 5 years, we actually had the number of women who have attended all our meetings, all our trainings, and how many of them, have spoke during the meetings, because we also need to know, are these women just coming for the sake of it, just because we said, bring 2 women, so they bring the woman just for numbers. And for me, that's why I keep telling my young fellow women that gender mainstreaming is not all about the numbers at the end of the day. It's about how are these numbers working for our benefits. You can attain the 40, 50%, But then if those numbers are not working for the women, then gender mainstreaming has not really happened. You can have in parliament 60% women and 40% male, and have so much inequality among the people of the country. So for me, it's not about the numbers, but it's about how are these numbers working for us? How is that one woman changing the board? How is that one woman changing the struggle for women and reducing women inequality? So that's just in brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gudrun Lachenmann, you are a professor emeritus at the University of Bielefeld and did extensive research in mostly Francophone Africa on women's and peasants' movements. Caroline raised a few points about economic participation of women. From your research, where would you put your finger when we say these are the main aspects that we need to bear in mind when looking at a new global universal framework that really wants to increase women participation in economic processes and decision making?
Don't have to press anywhere. Is this okay? Yeah. Just a first remark as an introduction. What you heard now, I was thinking, does it? Yeah, it works now. I was thinking about methodology, discussing about indicators and understanding, and can we understand through measuring? I'm not so sure. But what we have heard now is really doing qualitative research on economy and gender empowerment with a biographic method. We have learned a lot from you. Thanks a lot for sharing your biography with us. And especially the difficulties in Africa for a woman, an educated woman, to enter the labor market, to need a very strong support by family. And there we have already a concept, and we see, you say, I have relations in this country and in Zambia and somewhere. And that's why we, in a gender sociological approach and the economic approach, say the household, it's always a very poor unit to measure the results and understand what is happening. It's okay, we know all women want to be head, they are forcibly sometimes head of household, but normally the men are, and the equality is not there. But in reality, the social and the economic relations of the women, what we call female economy, are much broader, and you probably, I don't know, your brothers probably help to pay your fees and so on. So it's very difficult to grasp what a female economy or the way women do economic acts is embedded, as we call it, in society and in a broader way. And I think that's sometimes so, because of that, it's so difficult to have indicators, because all these indicators we have transferred from northern economies don't fit so much. We are talking about a transformative approach, and there I think we have to have some doubts whether the conventional mainstreaming, which is often bureaucratic, is maybe too much bottom down and not like empowerment bottom up, and look really at women in their social situation and regarding their agency. And I was comparing a little bit the positions of different documents which are circling at the moment, and I must say I was impressed by the recent World Bank publication. I would never have thought that, about voice and agency and bringing things in an economic way, which would normally really regard agency, and the hindrances and the disadvantages women face. And because I guess with the Millennium Goals, the problem was nobody knew how it had happened, either that they are fulfilled or they are not fulfilled. So we need some more interrelating the different problems. And the issues we were, for example, already discussing yesterday, and in this type of economy as a gendered structure, which what term Diane Elson has introduced some time ago, which is really interesting. It means really you have the aim as such, gender empowerment or women's empowerment, and then in all fields you have to look at, there is this gendered structure. This does not mean that women and men do always the same thing. That's often the problem with the term of equality. I have often African women heard say, we don't want equality, we only want our rights. We don't want to be equal with the men. We are not equal, and the men say that again. I think that's one of the problems with these global, universal approaches. And I'm not really sure what this universality will mean, because in some of the papers, they say according to the national situation or something, and there everything can come in and say, oh, in our culture, of course, the man decides what happens, what we are planting in the fields and something. Okay, but that's will be a little bit shorter. The problems with regard to this social embeddedness of the economy is really that we have to include and look at the power structures. This has been mentioned today already, that there are the legitimacy of entitlements for women, and normally embedded in culture. And that's, for example, the big thing in the land question. Women, everybody says, oh, we have to count how many women and so few are owning land, but this means there should be an individual private ownership, and this is not property, and this does not exist in Africa everywhere. There have been many attempts to reform the land question, but the entitlements, women used to have entitlements to get land from the husband, from the brother, from something. We have heard a positive example that the court has given the land to the women, but we have cases from Togo where this has not been possible, and it's very complicated with this legal pluralism. You have the modern court, so to speak, and you have your local courts with customary law, which even comes from colonial times and so on. So these entitlements, I prefer that as a better concept than excess, and somebody said, it's not excess, it should be, what did she say? Control, of course. Yeah, control of the land. But what we think in the female economy, what is a real problem now, is these entitlements, female entitlements, become deformalized, terrible word. They are not formal according to the economic law, the modern economic law. So the women just can lose their land when they are divorced or whatever, or otherwise they have to pay it now because to buy it, because in certain areas it's more or less officially sold, and then some women can have the money by trade or something, and they can buy some land, but others, of course, can't. So we cannot just say women need access to land. We have to see what happens with the whole land tenure system and how to get land title. And this means that we also have to look at the articulation of the reproductive and the productive sector with regard to economy. We know this, but of course in a continent like Africa, this is much more important. Not only because in many cases we have heard how many hours women are carrying the water. In some situations they have, as a woman group or as a peasant organization, they have organized water pumps and so on, and they organize it in a what the World Bank said was a community management aspect. And this is beyond the caring economy even. And this is unpaid work, of course, and we cannot ask that this should be paid everywhere. But we have to take into account that this has to be done, and maybe the father of some children will change the nappies and what else. But I don't know whether they will take over this reproductive economy and the management and the self-help aspects in all the villages, in all the cities and so on. So that's the same thing with subsistence and market economy, that subsistence has still a very old-fashioned implication, but of course the important thing for food security and so on is at least certain percentage of own production of food. And it's not just a traditional economy, it's absolutely important. But then neither the agricultural extension service nor the input providers are helping this subsistence economy of the women to feed the family. And that's another informal sector within the economy. And the word informal economy does not appear in any of these papers I have looked at. And we know that the formal economy is very big in Africa and in other countries. Everybody says it, but often it's illegal, it's a shadow economy, and it doesn't mean that one doesn't have to pay for services, even if there are corruption, so to speak, informal fees and so on, and it's not promoted. And often women organizations, and I wonder in your case, and I will stop then, whether these organizations are officially recognized as economic subjects to be able to get credit and something. And in Senegal, there were more or less the same, the peasant organizations organized this kind of things, but as soon as they were not officially recognized, they were not economic subjects. And in Senegal, it was the men were the groupement d'intérêt économique, they were formally economic subjects, but the women were women promotion groups or something, controlled by the state, which happens in many cases, that the state interferes a lot, and they were not allowed to do formal economy, not allowed to take credit and so on. And now we have this small credit thing, which doesn't help so much.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you. I think there are a few relevant points that I would like to bring up with Gael. One is this idea of social embeddedness, and we've talked about this in all the different panels that we had today. So how do we, once we have some kind of economic participation of women, how do we make it stick, and how do we make it sure that it's really embedded in society, including the men around the women and the society at large? And I would like to ask you to comment on that, what kind of experience you made with your project. And then the other aspect that Gudrun mentioned, how do you bridge that gap between the more informal economy and more formal structures to also make it ensure that these kind of access that you provide to women sustain over the next centuries, hopefully.
Thank you. Regarding first the sustainability, I think one of the aspects that we are looking at when we found the program is the exit strategy that the NGO is having for the program. So I think the institutionalization of the program is very important. If they are working with local government, for instance, this is really key. If they are just working on their own, we know that it's not going to be sustainable. We also know that they need also to involve men. I think we've said that several times. And I think these elements are very critical, and we need also to change the behaviors in the long run. I think we had some issues. For instance, I was talking with a program manager who said that this is a 2-year program, and the women are having some literacy courses. And I thought 2 years is good. You can learn how to write and everything. And he said, yes, but you know, when you're children, you go to school for 8 years. You don't have just 2 years to learn. So he's afraid that after 2 years, then the women are going to forget all the things that they have learned before. But there are some things that will stick. For instance, I've never realized that when we say literacy, it means, for instance, that they know how to dial a number for telephone, because before that they didn't know the number, so they were not able to call anyone. So this is the kind of thing that will stay and that they will be able to have in the long run. And the second part of your question was about?
To look at the formalization of
Yes.
these informal structures, and I think you also have some points that we
Yes.
can share some of that between the two of you.
Yeah, I think the trade unions have a lot to say about this. But just to say that in the programs that we have, usually these structures are formal in the way that they elect a secretary, they elect a treasurer, and someone who is in charge of the programming and communication with the women. So it is a formal structure, and we look at this very closely because this is also for the sustainability of the program.
But is it recognized by the state?
Yes, because they can then open a bank account and everything. So yes, it is.
I think this is something that I would like to ask you about. You told us yesterday that there are countries in East Africa where 95% of the economy is informal, and that you start to work on policies and approaches how to include them, integrate this part of the economy, which is mostly done by women, include that into your work and acknowledge and recognize also the potential of this informal workspace. If we look at the SDG standalone goal that was discussed several times today, it does acknowledge unpaid care work at home, but it does not make any reference to the much larger informal economy. And this is something that I would like to ask you about, how you start dealing with that within your context and what kind of policies you think should be pushed for at the global level to acknowledge this part of especially African economies.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that we need to understand is, if we are going to talk about women economic empowerment from an African perspective, we need to understand the kind of the economic sectors that are there. We need to appreciate that although most of the African countries, you read the World Bank reports, have had impressive economic growth year after year. I was reading a World Bank report on Ghana, and the World Bank said, I can't really remember the exact word they used, but it was like above impressive, the economic growth that Ghana has experienced year after year. But the problem is, this is a jobless economic growth. The economy is growing, but the inequality is growing. The unemployment rate is growing, and mostly among the youth and mostly among the women. And I normally tell people, Tahrir Square in Algeria is not far in the sub-Saharan, because it's just a time bomb. So many young people, highly qualified, with nowhere to go in terms of job opportunities, in terms of access to government procurement, in terms of access to finance. So it's a time bomb. Where do all these people go to? Most of them go to the informal economy in terms of access to jobs. And in the East Africa, Rwanda is, Burundi has the highest informal economy, which is 95% of the economy operates in the informal economy. So I tell people, just take a chill pill, relax. If you're going to talk about economic empowerment of women, you have to start addressing the informal economy. Because being from Kenya with 70% of the economy in the informal economy, more than 60% of the people who are operating in the informal economy are women. So you can't start making legislations, you can't start making policies that do not apply for the informal economy, because that means you are, forgetting more than 50% of the women who are actually economically active, but they are in the informal economy. For us, our work as the trade union is to look at how can we reach out to those women in the informal economy. We are working with what we call street vendors in terms of how do they get recognized. And one of the things that I've learned with working with groups in the informal economy, they are actually organized. I know most people say, oh, the informal economy is so unorganized. It's not unorganized. We are the ones who are not organized. They are organized in their own unorganized way. Because even for the street vendors, that woman selling vegetables along Moi Avenue in Nairobi, she can never go to sell the vegetables on Harambee Street in Nairobi, because that's not her place for her to sell those vegetables. So even in that small unorganized way, they are organized. But the problem has been, how do you bridge the gap in terms of a legal framework to apply for them, in terms of them having kind of decent employment? And when you talk about decent employment, decent job, we are talking about employment in terms of having, getting enough to put food on the table, in terms of their rights, in terms of social dialogue, and social dialogue means participation in terms of policy-making processes that affect them, and last but not least, when you're talking about issues of social security. So when you talk about decent work, decent job, you look at the four things: employment, social dialogue, rights, and that comes with rights to land, because you cannot empower a woman economically and yet she cannot access credit. She has no right to land. So for the trade union, we reach out to those associations in the informal economy that are already organized and talk with them and see how can we help them in terms of building their capacity to know their rights, in terms of helping them with the local authorities, as she has talked about, and also looking at what is their economic value in terms of a certain country. We've done that with Kenya, we've done that with Tanzania, we've worked with Rwanda in terms of what you call the motorcycle riders, because that's a common mode of transport in Africa, and trying to be the go-between the association and the authority, most of the time being the local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it has become clear quite quickly what kind of resources and experience we have in front here. So I would like to make a round of questions from the audience, and I would really like to invite you to ask questions to the three women in front here, because I think there's another hour dedicated to new aspects that haven't been raised yet, and to points that you would like to add to the discussion. But for now, I think it would be great to really talk to the women that we have up here and draw from their experience to fill in some of the blind spots that we have when talking about the economic dimension. Any questions, comments? Here in the front. Sarah.
Hi, and thank you for such a wonderful, insightful panel. My question is for Caroline. When it comes to the formal economy, since the informal economy is already self-organized to a certain extent, what would be the benefit to them of formalizing it? We know the benefit to the government, taxes and things like that, but what incentives are there for them to formalize their businesses?
Okay, we'll start with Caroline, and then you also comment on that.
I think coming from a trade union perspective, we know in terms of formalization will need to put in place things like taxation, having, you know, good taxation system, regulations and private property rights in terms of access to finance. But from a trade union perspective is we know people who work in the informal economy lack in terms of regulation, in terms of the law. Issues of social security, that's one issue that is easy for you to take and run with in terms of the informal economy. People who are not, you know, passing down poverty from generation to generation. I was a market vendor selling fruits on the streets of Nairobi with my baby on the back. It's a very common, you know, sin. And as my baby grows up, the only thing she knows is the streets. So she will also take up that, you know, grow in the street, come also help the mother to sell the vegetables on the streets. So for me, in terms of, you know, formalization, the informal economy is what kind of social security or social protection scheme can you give these particular people to ensure that you know, my children have a better life than what I'm having. I can actually make a little and have enough to save, or I can make a little to be able to take my children to school, but not to use my children as part of, you know, getting income. We have families that have worked in the tea plantation generation after generation after generation, and it's because whatever they are making there is not enough to sustain them. So I have to bring along my children, I have to bring along my grandchildren, because at the end of the day, the amount of money I'm paid is how much kilos of tea have I picked. For me to pick that much, I need to bring my children. But if you have a social protection scheme that ensures that I can work in the tea plantation and my child can go to school, or my child can have access to the basic health care, then I save a lot of money in terms of my family continuation. So for the trade union perspective, it goes back to the rights of the woman in the informal economy and access to social security schemes. Thank you.
You also wanted to comment on that question?
Just a few words. I think that's very important, the social protection thing. And as far as I know, the German corporation has started quite early. We were doing research on that at the German Development Institute quite some time ago. And but the problem is if it's too high up, if it's a state, a national security with regard to all the conditions attached. And I remember ILO report on Cameroon, they suggested, but only to secure, to bring in men with a maximum 7 family members, because the women's economy, they said it was so unclear, they didn't know how to take the fees. The men were planting coffee, and there it's simple to deduce the fees from the revenue if it's state control, but the women are out of order, so to speak. But then we were talking yesterday, and I heard about that too. There are, so to speak, in between the formal and the informal system, there are a real big number of different initiatives which are quite interesting, but of course they are not overall regulated scheme, so it's difficult. And that's what one of my points, so to speak, this kind of formalization can take on the middle range level, so to speak, a certain formality without being controlled completely by the state or the authorities who are not completely familiar with the situation. And the other thing is, I think, which is in favor of certain formalization, that there is a lot of crowding out of women's economic traditional fields, And when international or whatever companies come in, for example, in the textile area or in trade, or like the Chinese things which come in, and the women are really crowded out of that phase. Or in Cameroon, when the marketing boards were abolished, the men went into food crop trade, which normally is the women's area, because there are differences in female and male economy. And then the women were out because they were informal. They had no cooperatives. And I wonder, in all the papers I read, they talk about private sector, but they do not mention, probably cooperatives would be part of the private sector, but there are also approaches about economy of solidarity and so on. So the argument would be to go against, there should be upgrading, which is very difficult in the informal sector, as you said, and implies child labor. And the other thing is that there is a crowding out of women out of their traditional fields of economic fields.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's someone in the very middle of the audience.
Ellen Sesser from Amica speaking. I have a question to Caroline. First of all, thank you for a very interesting speeches. My question is, I'm sure you know about the fair trade movement in the world, and it's a really growing movement since about 40 years. And the main purpose for this movement is to help small producers or people working in the informal economy who don't really gain a lot of money and stay poor even when they work a lot. And particularly it's meant to help women to get better income, to get the chance to bring their kids to school or learn themselves things. And I wonder whether you see any positive impact of this movement, whether it's you see it at all, or is it just a little spot in the water?
Thank you very much. In terms of fair trade, we've seen what it has done to the cocoa farmers in West Africa, in terms of the farmers who were growing. We went there, and one farmer was actually, saying they had never tasted chocolate in their life, and yet they are the ones who, spend time, breaking the cocoa throughout their lives. But you've seen what fair trade has done to those farmers in terms of, removing middlemen who are exploiting the small-scale farmers of cocoa and making sure that they earn directly from cocoa. And in Kenya, particularly for those who come from Netherlands, Kenya is, I think, the second largest exporter of flowers to Netherlands. And there has been a continuous call in terms of, and this is coming from the consumer, in terms of the rights of workers that are working in the flower plantation. What kind of chemicals are they using in the flower in the flower plantations? In terms of what kind of wages are you paying them? Are you using child labor? And these are the consumers of the flowers that are asking this. So back home in Kenya, the Flower Association of Kenya is actually putting certain setting certain standards so that they can continue exporting flowers to certain companies in Netherlands by putting the kind of chemicals they are using is not, harmful to the workers. And as you know, in the plantation, 70% of the people working in the flower plantation are actually women, because they say women have an eye for detail, and flowers, in terms of the way it's supposed to be picked, the way it's supposed to be planted, needs a lot of patience that most of the factories say it's better to employ women than men, and most of the time they are young women. So I've seen what fair trade is doing. Much can be done. We need to do more in terms of the different bilateral agreements that we are having. And that's why yesterday when I was talking to my colleagues, I was saying in terms of women economic empowerment in Africa, we also need to go back and look at what kind of trade agreements are we having in terms of bilateral, in terms of multilateral agreements? You're talking about the economic partnership agreement that so far I think it's East Africa that has rejected to sign that. But do you sign an economic power, a partnership agreement that benefits a flower exporting company to the, to the collapse of the small, companies that are coming up? Because some of the things that we are being told is you need to open up in terms of your market. How is this going to hurt the informal economy that provides employment to most of the women? The issues of the industrial policy, the issue of agricultural policy, how are women being brought on the table to discuss these issues as we go on? So for me, fair trade is actually doing some kind of work. We can do it on a large scale, and you will see the benefits. Thank you.
I would take a last round of questions if there are any. There's one here, one. Any? Okay.
My question to both ladies working in Africa is how much of a part of development of women's rights does IT carry? I.e. sort of the mobile revolution is set to enhance a lot of economic growth. Does that pertain also to women? Because we saw over here in the West, it started with men. Now it seems everybody seems to have a mobile. Does the same apply to what you can see?
Gail, would you like to comment on that question first?
In the programs that we are implementing in Africa, there are several programs where they are using IT, they are using mobile phones and internet connection as well. I think it's key for women to be aware of what's going on in the world and to be able also, even for day-to-day practice, for instance, if they are in labor, they are able to call their family or they can call the hospital, this kind of thing. So it's really important. But I worked in Bangkok, and I must say that almost half of the program of the Fund for Gender Equality had an impact on IT, and not in Africa, not so much. So in my experience, in Asia, it's much more than in Africa. But it's for sure, it's one of the things that we have to consider in the future, and it will change, I think, the face of Africa.
Can I? I could chip in that because I come from Kenya, where we invented the foreign money transfer, knowing that in terms of account holders for the banks, women did not have that access. So we have seen more women using we call it M-Pesa, the money transfer, to an extent that it has been revision. I have my phone, so maybe during tea break, I could just show you briefly what it does. But currently, you can actually save money on your phone. And in terms of those women working in the informal economy, you can actually, at the end of the day, after you have sold or you've done your small work, just deposit the money in your phone and move it from your own account to your savings account within the phone. And up to a certain amount of money in your phone, you can actually get access to loan just by a click of a button on your phone. And an SMS will be sent back to you telling you that you can actually get up to this much of money. So in terms of East Africa and Kenya particular, in terms of microfinancing of the women, it has actually really helped the women to get access to the finance. And also in terms of just operating the small, what we call the M-Pesa kiosks, the places where you can go withdraw and deposit money. And it has reached up to the, grassroots, because even back to my village, I can be able to send my grandmother money. It's so easy. You don't need to go to the bank. You don't need anything. Once the money comes to the phone, my grandmother has to just send one of my little cousins to go to the shop with the phone and her ID, and the money will be withdrawn from the phone. So even in terms of transfer of money, saving for the women and access to cash, it has really, really helped the women. Thank you.
Okay, so before we close this panel, I would like to pose one more question to the three women sitting here with me. When was there one more? There were 2 people. 2 even. Okay, then obviously I give the floor to the audience.
Okay, Angela Langenkamp again from GIZ. I'm once again puzzled by the title, The Implementation of the Right to Equal Economic Participation. And I think once again we fall short of looking at the challenges, because you might have the right, but you might not have the opportunity. And we talked about that before. Just to give you an example, in 2008, the World Bank extended its Doing Business report to look at challenges women face in opening up or being economically active. And sometimes it's just the fact like registering your own business. You have to travel to the district capital, which might take you 2 days. You can't leave your children behind. So men are easy and more mobile to go and do that. So they register while the women end up in the informal economy because just about this little extra hurdle they have to take. So we need to really, I mean, the rights-based approach is extremely important, but empowering women takes more than that. And so therefore, what I want to say is really, we need to take the broader look at the challenges we need to address and fight for.
Maybe we can immediately have the second comment and then do the final round. There's a lady right back.
Yeah, just another comment on what was already raised in the topic of fair trade. I think generally one big problem concerning this topic is a missing transparency in international trade. So I think the fair trade movement, it has developed a lot, but it's still much too small. And here again, I want to point on the responsibility of the governments of the consumer countries, because there are still too many big companies who are not willing to commit themselves to certain obligations, which should be, I think, normal in world trade. And I think here we should work more with the power of the consumers, but therefore we need awareness raising. And there again, it is the responsibility of the governments of the consumer countries.
Thank you very much. And Sarah again. Can we get a microphone over here, please? Thanks.
I'll be quick. Following up on one of the participants' comments on whether we're focusing too much on microfinance, SMEs are the true engine of job creation and stimulating the economy. At what point do we start moving away from micro to actually encouraging SMEs and empowering women to, to invest in SMEs?
Would you like to respond to that?
I will try and respond to that, but I will start by responding to Dr. In terms of access, there are certain initiatives that are actually working, and I just came from home, and Kenya has set something they are calling Huduma Center. It's like, I can't get the right word in English, but this is like a one-stop center for all government kind of, you can get your ID, you can do a name search for an organization, you can register an organization, you can apply for your passport, and they are located in all the 8 provinces. So these are some of the initiatives that are being done in certain countries in terms of challenges for registrations. I know that is currently in Kenya, and I've been to one, and it's actually working. You can go there, register a business, ask for anything, as long as it's a service that is provided by the government. It's trying to reach out to the grassroots, and probably this is because of the devolution of power, the change of the structures of government in Kenya, with having more of the county government than having everything centralized there. So probably we might see some of these things, because currently Tanzania is in the process of negotiating for a new constitution, and these are some of the things that they are talking do I have to travel from Arusha to Dar es Salaam, which is 10-hour drive by bus just to go and apply for a business? Or can I be able to do that in Tanzania? And those are some of the issues that we are doing in terms of building capacities of our members to be able to engage in such discussions at the country level and at the county level. In terms of the micro enterprises, I was reading a very interesting study that showed that 99% of enterprises in Nigeria are actually micro enterprises. So the discussions of micro enterprises, I think it's not something that we can stop discussing now, because for any socio-economic transformation to happen in Nigeria, a country that has 167 million people, can only be achieved if there's an effort to develop and improve the productivity of micro enterprises. So we need to be able to grow those micro enterprises to move from being micro and to move on. And in terms of transparency of resources, I like what my sister says, and that's one of the campaigns that we are working with as an organization in East Africa in terms of in terms of illicit financial flow. And there has been a study that was done, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, I think Tanzania, Uganda are part of the countries that the study was done. And for 10 years, the study shows that Kenya loses every year up to 2011, $1.5 billion in illicit financial flow. So these are some of the amount of money that we can look at as women and ask, if I am working 6 hours per day to fetch water, and Kenya is losing 1.5 billion shillings per year, how many balls can be sunk in Kenya by using that 1.5 billion Kenyan shilling? Because one of the challenges that I have found is some of those amount of money that are being lost, they are too big for me to even comprehend. If I go home and I tell my grandmother, you know what, Kenya loses 1.5 billion, she'll go, oh, okay, 1.5 billion. It's too big for her to even comprehend. But if I say Kenya is losing 1.5 billion, which means grandma, that 1.5 billion can be able to build a health center that will take you 2 minutes to walk to the health center and, you know, get your diabetic shot, and you can be able to get your diabetic medicine for this amount of period. So it's just trying to bring down that kind of amount to an amount that someone at the low level will actually be able to understand. So it's bringing down the campaign. If you're talking about decent jobs, what does decent job mean to that woman who's working in the export processing zone? What does it mean for her to have a decent job? It means that I have to have enough in my pocket to be able to take my children to school and also to be able to go and buy my son a toy, because I can actually afford to do that. So it's just trying to wrap these messages in a way that women can actually understand what you're talking. And if you're talking about gender mainstreaming, what does that mean? Can you say it in my language in a way that that woman back home in the village can actually understand, and therefore she will join the cause in fighting for gender equity? That's one problem that I have with us feminists. We have these big, big words that we use. And one thing that I've learned was, I use my grandmother a lot, because I've learned if I cannot convince my grandmother, then I can't convince anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also on that final note, I don't know how many of us here are grandmothers already, but maybe we can also apply that to our mothers or great-grandmothers. I think we have to come to a close now. I would try to make a few points that I would draw from this discussion. One being some kind of reference and some kind of acknowledgement of the informal sector, which is a point that has been raised by all of you, and that has been also referenced by the audience. The importance of trade agreements or whatever kind of agreements, economic agreements between the developed, so-called developed world and less developed world, and what kind of impact they have on the economic participation of women in those countries. And finally, a point that I think applies to everything that we discussed here today, which is the gap between the policies that might be in place and then how do we actually find a way to make them work and to make them stick in societies at large. And I think this is something that I would like to very briefly cover in the last round among the three of you, because when talking about economic participation, we can't just ignore the private sector, and how do we get women into the decision-making within the private sector and get them to sit at the table. There's a debate going on in Germany at the moment whether quotas are the way forward or what kind of policies might be needed. So from your point of view, how do we involve the private sector and how do we transform the private sector in a way that we can increase women participation throughout the entire business decision-making and implementation? Gail, would you like to start the final round?
Okay, just on this question, I think this is a reflection that we have both in the north and the south, that we need also in the private sectors to look at the advisory board and make sure that there are women in these boards and that the private sector is also owned by women. And I just wanted to make just one comment, final comment, because this is the last round. Just want to stress on the fact that we need to work not just with women in general, but to leave no one behind, meaning that we have to work with rural women and also women living with disability, women living with HIV/AIDS, indigenous women. All these women, we said earlier that women of all ages, I think we have to be to make sure that all women in their differences are part of our program, of our economic empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you. Gudrun.
The one we didn't really go into that in the private sector, in the formal sector, and not at all about the countries of the north. Well, about quota, you can discuss a long time, but I think at least in Africa, but also here, we could even have an indicator how many women are choosing technical subjects, biochemistry, for example, without going astray afterwards and find a job. But it's difficult to find a job. But of course, you need the educated people. But this, we have forgotten a little bit about the knowledge transfer. And the knowledge really, well, we talked about IT, which works, and but also the technical and vocational education is absolutely important. Even in, well, not even in Germany as well, it is a problem that too few women go and learn engineering and so on. So that's one of the things. The other thing we have not addressed is the call it reconciliation, what we say here, and that appears, I think, in the BMZ paper of private and private life and work. But this doesn't concern only the woman. Of course, we know that, but often it does. Men and women, and it's absolutely difficult. It doesn't work so well here. We have looked at the embeddedness in the other countries. And one group we should not forget, I think, is a migrant community. I haven't seen and heard in no paper anything about the migrant people, for example, in Africa. I know it from Mauritania. There are really spaces where people without any rights, no nationality, they are in the informal but illegal sector often. Those who have been returning from Europe or not accepted or whatever and can or don't want to go back to their countries. And the other, in the transnational economy, of course, between the south and the north, like the Filipino housemaids and so on. This is still a big economic thing in the whole world economy, which I think is not, maybe because the actors are over the nations and the United Nations, but not so much the transnational economy in between. And somehow I think it should be more taken account of.
Thank you. Caroline, the last word is with you.
I think for me, when we have discussions of private sector, I ask myself, when you're talking about private sector for an African perspective, who is the private sector? I think for us in Africa and not really Africa only, but any developing country, whether in Asia or Africa or Central America, we need to ask the question, who are these private sector that you're talking about, private sector to drive development? Because I know where I come from. I know how the private sector looks like. There are multinational countries that are coming from abroad, investing into my country. So from where I'm coming from, when you're talking private sector, are you talking about Coca-Cola? Are you talking about SDV, in the transport company? Are you talking about DHL? Or are you talking about what we call back home the Kadogo economy? Kadogo means very small. You know, that woman who sells vegetables. Are you talking about such people? So in terms of a developing country, for me, I think we have to be very careful when we are talking about private sector. Because first of all, our governments are not able, because when you talk about private sector, regulation is very, very important. And we know where I come from, the government itself cannot even regulate the current private sector that is there in terms of loss of tax, and that's why we are recording, you know, those large number of amount of money that is being lost in tax from the private sector. When you're talking about private sector, from where I'm coming from, are you talking about privatization of basic service providing, like water? Is that what you're talking about when you talk about private sector development? Are you talking about privatization of electricity? You go to a country like Ghana or Nigeria, whereby if you don't have a generator, then you're in trouble because the power cuts, you know, I can't even explain them. So when you talk about private sector, are you talking about privatizing of electricity? Are you talking about privatization of the health sector? And for me, I was just talking with Saran, and I was talking about the whole Ebola issue. It goes back to how much we've even privatized the health sector to an extent that, you know, someone who doesn't have money doesn't have access to the public sector, because if we had a public sector that, a health sector that was functioning, then Ebola can be able to be controlled to some extent. But we have privatized the healthcare system in Africa. Are you talking about that? Are you talking about privatization of basic education, whereby we privatize up to primary school education to an extent that if I don't have money, then I can't take my child to school? And if we have the free primary education, then the quality is questionable, whereby you have 100 children in a class being taught by one teacher. You are in trouble if your kid is not bright enough, because the teacher will not waste time on that kind of a child. So for me, the issue of private sector coming from a developing country is, who is this private sector we are talking about? Is it selling more of Africa that has already been sold, or what do we mean? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the three panelists and the many questions from the audience. And I think as with the other panels, we are left with a number of new questions instead of answering all the questions that were in the room. So, but I'm happy to leave that challenge to Connie to now bring all the different streams and open questions together. Thank you very much.